The fuel pump is the heart of a diesel engine. It ensures that the right amount of fuel is injected into the combustion chamber at the right moment. The fuel delivered by the fuel pump passes through high-pressure pipes to the fuel valves. The high temperature in the combustion chamber, due to compression of the air, ensures self-ignition of the finely atomized fuel. Here you see in slow motion the process of combustion in an RTA diesel engine. To ensure optimal combustion at all times, the fuel pump must be periodically checked and adjusted. This film is intended to show you how the Sulzer valve-controlled pump works and to show you how it should be checked and adjusted. This sectional model enables you to follow the working principle of the fuel pump. With its upward stroke, the plunger delivers fuel to the injection valves. The suction valve controls the beginning of fuel delivery by closing, while the spill valve controls the end of delivery by opening. The delivery valve functions only as a non-return valve. The closing of the suction valve and the opening of the spill valve are controlled by the upward motion of the plunger drive through these two rocker arms and adjustable push rods. From this, it is clear that fuel is only delivered when the suction and spill valves are closed. By turning the eccentric shaft, which acts as the rocker arm fulcrum, the spill valves are made to open earlier or later, regulating in this way the fuel quantity to be delivered. As a guiding value for the fuel delivery rate, there is a scale from 0 to 10, the so-called load indicator. You'll find all the instructions you need for checking and adjusting the fuel pump in the maintenance manual. At the beginning of the working sheets, you will always find a list of the tools with the appropriate code numbers. From the code numbers, you can find the corresponding tools in the maintenance manual. Always look up carefully in the maintenance manual the instructions given in the course of this film. Always use the correct tools and always ensure cleanliness when assembling. The necessary adjustments may be found in the acceptance report under Setting Table, Sheet A. The fuel pump must be adjusted only to the values taken from the setting table, namely the load indicator position, the idle stroke A, that is the plunger movement from the base circle of the fuel cam till the suction valve closes, beginning of delivery, that is the crank angle in degrees before or after top dead center when the suction valve closes, the total stroke B, that is the plunger movement from the base circle of the fuel cam till the spill valve opens, end of delivery, that is the crank angle in degrees after top dead center when the spill valve opens. The effective delivery stroke is arrived at by subtracting the idle stroke A from the total stroke B, while the delivery angle is the sum of or the difference between the crank angles at beginning and end of delivery. Before starting to check or adjust the fuel pump, the following preparations must be made.
The engine should have run at least 30 minutes on diesel fuel before it is stopped. Follow carefully the shutting down instructions stated in the operation manual. Before starting with the fuel pump timing, carefully check the fuel pump linkage. It must move easily and must not be slack or worn. Worn linkages have to be replaced. With the help of this distance sleeve, the VIT linkage is fixed in position 0. Make sure that the pointer on the VIT indicator is now exactly at position 0. After closing the starting air shutoff valve and opening the indicator cocks, work can be started on the fuel pump. Close the fuel supply and return valves on the fuel pumps in question. By removing these two screw plugs, the remaining fuel is drained off from the pump block. Before adjusting the fuel pump, make sure that the cams and rollers are in good condition. Before the fuel pump can be adjusted, there are further preparations to be made. Start up the oil pumps for the bearings and crossheads in order to get the fuel cam reversing servo motors into the correct position. Set the run stop lever 5.07 on the local manoeuvring stand to running position. Set the reversing lever 5.03 on the local manoeuvring stand to ahead before engaging the turning gear in order to avoid a 30 bar pilot air system breakdown. Check the red pin on all valve groups D below the fuel pump cages. They must protrude. The protruded red pin shows the correct end position of the corresponding reversing servo motor. On the control air supply unit A, the control air shutoff valves are closed, and then the system must be vented with the drain valves located on these two bottles. Look up the maintenance manual on this point. After the reversing lever 5.03 has been set to ahead, the turning gear can be engaged. Now the fuel lever 3.12 is disengaged from its remote control position by lifting it up. Thereafter it will be engaged with the fuel linkage and brought to position 8. Set the fuel lever 3.12 on the local manoeuvring stand so that the pointer of the main load indicator coincides exactly with position 8 specified in the acceptance report. Finally, check that no fuel delivery reducing spacers below the valve pushrods have been fitted. Refer to the maintenance manual. First, the stagnation pressure control valve is dismantled. Watch that no parts drop out. All internal parts of the stagnation pressure control valve are now carefully inspected. Defective parts must be replaced. After slackening these Allen screws crosswise, the tree valve covers are removed. After lifting off the valve covers, note the valve designations. S for suction, D or P for delivery, and U for spill valve. After removing the springs, the 3 pressure bushes are released. Now carefully take out the pressure bushes. The valves are taken out with the help of this withdrawing device. Consult the maintenance manual again. The valve cover and valve contact surfaces on the fuel pump block must be in good condition. Rough or damaged contact surfaces must be reconditioned. If necessary, the sealing surfaces on the fuel pump block and covers can be reconditioned with this lapping tool. Refer to the maintenance manual. Examine the 3 valves carefully, especially their seats and contact surfaces in the fuel pump block. Defective valves must be replaced before the fuel pump timing is carried out. This is the suction valve stamped with S. This one is a delivery valve stamped with D or P. And finally, the last one is the spill valve stamped with U. After cleaning the fuel pump block thoroughly, the suction and spill valves are rinsed in clean diesel oil and refitted without their springs. Don't mix up the valves. Use Molykote paste G as lubricant. Make sure that the threads of the pressure bushes are in perfect condition. After the pressure bushes have been hand tightened, their position is marked with a felt tip pen. The final tightening must be done with a torque wrench to a torque of 160 Newton meters. Ascertain that the pressure bushes have been turned by an angle of 25 degrees from the reference mark made previously. Before mounting the dial gauges and their holders, make sure that they move easily. When fitting the dial gauge above the plunger, make sure that it has enough stroke left to reach the cam peak position. After all preparations have been made, the fuel pump is adjusted as follows. The engine is turned until the plunger reaches its highest position. The dial gauge above the plunger may also be used to indicate this. The dial gauge above the suction valve, now closed, is set to 0, or if necessary with a certain pre-tension. Do not alter this adjustment. Look up in the maintenance manual on this point. The engine is turned astern until the plunger reaches its lowest position. Check whether the roller is on the base circle of the cam. The dial gauges above the spill valve, which is now closed, and above the plunger are both set to 0. Also here if necessary with a certain pre-tension. Do not alter the adjusted gauges. As a general rule, make absolutely sure that all adjustments and readings are reached only when turning ahead to avoid angle differences caused by the gear backlash. The engine is turned ahead until the dial gauge above the plunger shows the amount of the idler stroke A specified in the acceptance report. With these special wrenches, the adjustable push rod of the suction valve is adjusted so that the dial gauge above it shows 0.02 millimeters. Don't forget the pre-tensioning figures. The locking nut of the push rod in question must have been previously firmly tightened. On the flywheel graduations, check the corresponding crank angle for the beginning of delivery and compare it with the angle stated in the acceptance report. The maximum admissible deviation is plus or minus 0.3 degrees. The engine is turned ahead further until the dial gauge above the plunger shows the value of the total stroke B specified in the acceptance report. Also here, don't forget the pre-tension you may have set previously. The dial gauge over the suction valve must now indicate 0. Just like the suction valve, the adjustable push rod of the spill valve is adjusted so that the dial gauge above it shows 0.02 millimeters. Don't forget the pre-tensioning figures. The locking nut of the push rod in question must have been previously firmly tightened. Finally, the corresponding angle for the end of delivery is read off on the flywheel and compared with the acceptance report. Look up the maintenance manual. After the fuel pump has been checked and adjusted in this way, the cut-out checks must be performed. These are very important to the safety of the engine. The engine is now first turned astern and then ahead until the gauge above the plunger shows the amount of the idle stroke A. At the same time, the dial gauge above the suction valve must show 0.02 millimeters. Don't forget the pre-tensioning figures. At the first cut-out check, it must be ascertained how much the spill valve is lifted when the suction valve is just closing and the load indicator is set to 0. This amount can be read off on the dial gauge above the spill valve and must be compared with the value quoted in the acceptance report. Only a small discrepancy is allowed, and it should never be less than 0.8 millimeters. While the pointer on the load indicator is at 0, check whether the pointer on the adjusting plate on the engine is also at 0. Only a small discrepancy is allowed. Set the fuel lever on the local maneuvering stand so that the pointer of the load indicator points again to position 8. The engine is turned ahead until the roller reaches the highest position. Now the manual cutout on the fuel pump can be checked. Attach the open-ended ring spanner to the cutout device. Push fully in and afterwards turn the spanner through 100 degrees in an anti-clockwise direction. There must be a clearance of about 2 millimeters between the roller and the fuel cam peak. Look up the maintenance manual on this point. After this check, the pump is cut in again. The adjustment of the fuel pumps have been completed. All parts are now reassembled in the reverse sequence. All internal pump parts have been rinsed with clean paraffin or kerosene or diesel oil. Use Mollycock Paste G as lubricant. Also, this pressure bush must be first hand tightened, then its position marked with a felt tip pen. The final tightening must be done with a torque wrench to a torque of 160 Newton meters. Ascertain also that this pressure bush has been turned by an angle of 25 degrees from the reference mark made previously. Don't forget the springs when reassembling. Grease all Allen screws with Mollycott paste G. Check the contact surfaces on the fuel pump bodies and covers once again. Also, these Allen screws are tightened evenly and crosswise in stages to a torque of 60 Newton meters. After carefully adjusting and checking the fuel pumps, all operations carried out in the course of the preparations must be restored to the previous state. Restore the variable injection timing mechanism to its original state. Set the fuel lever 3.12 to remote control position again. Put the pneumatic system under pressure again. Open the cocks of the fuel supply and return lines in the fuel channel, place the fuel system under pressure and perform a leak test. If necessary, the fuel system can be vented here with this priming valve. Finally, check the electrical safety cutout devices. For these very important checks, all systems must be in operation so that the engine is ready to start. The first cutout check must be performed with the reversing lever 5.03 still in position ahead. By moving the run stop lever 5.07 to stop, the cutout devices above all fuel pump blocks must be lifted. Watch the indicator pins above it. They must protrude. For the second cutout check, ascertain that the reversing lever 5.03 is set to the remote control position and the run stop lever 5.07 is again set to the run position. Now press the emergency stop knob on the local control panel. Here also, just like the first check, the cutout device above all fuel pump blocks must be lifted. Watch the indicator pins above it, they must protrude. Reset by pressing the emergency stop reset knob. Before we can do the last cutout check, the pipe connection G6 in the pneumatic logic unit G must be disconnected. If the air leak becomes too big and consequently the pressure drops down, plug G6. This cutout check must be performed by lowering a pressure in one of the main systems, for instance by closing the air spring venting valve 4.08 in the controlled air supply unit A. Here also, like the other checks, the cutout device above all fuel pump blocks must be lifted. Again watch the indicator pins above it, they must protrude. Open the air spring valve 4.08 and reconnect G6 again. Now the control system is ready for takeover to remote control and the engine is ready again to go into operation. Before starting the engine, follow all instructions in the operating manual stated under preparations before taking into service.
The fuel pumps should be checked and adjusted in this way every 6,000 to 8,000 hours of operation, or if fuel pump parts likely to affect fuel injection timing have been replaced. It is absolutely forbidden to adjust the fuel pump during operation by altering bushrod length. If you have any questions about this film, please address them to a station of our worldwide service organization. At this point, we would like to draw your attention to our diesel training center in Winterthur.